Okay. Hello. Hello and welcome to this session. I hope I'm audible. Um, Asking someone in the team to confirm yes. Thank you for the thumbs up. Um, so my name is Charlotte Baptista, and I lead product at Paperpal, where I specialize in building features to automate the writing process. Before we begin, here are just a few details to help you get the most out of this session. So we're on a platform called AirMeet. I just want to take you through some of the functions. The chat window is the icon right on the top. Please engage, be active. If you have questions, use the Q&A feature at the bottom because our team is monitoring that. So use that to ask questions. We'll do a Q&A session at the end and try to take some of those questions that we don't already answer on that feature itself. We'll have a few live polls to make this as engaging and conversational with our guest. So yeah, participate in the polls. We want to know what you think. And yes, many of you are interested in the recording and resources. All of those will be provided after this session. So hang on to that. And today we are joined by Dr. Faheem Ullah. Hi, Dr. Faheem. Just a quick introduction. Just a very quick introduction. So Dr. Faheem is an assistant professor and cybersecurity program director at the University of Adelaide in Australia. He has a PhD and postdoc in computer science that focuses on AI from the University of Adelaide. Aside from being a highly accomplished academic, he has received 2 gold medals and 1 silver medal and 6 academic distinctions. That's quite impressive. Dr. Faheem also somehow finds the time to serve as big data lead at CREST, the Center for Research on Engineering Software Technologies. He has published in top-notch journals and presented at conferences. But above all, he's also supervised 40-plus master's and PhD students. And he shares his knowledge online through his platform where he engages with, I have you over 135,000 followers. That's huge. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a packed agenda. Now to set things off, we asked you at the point of registration, I missed the slide. We asked you at the point of registration, what stage do you need more support with when you're in your publication journey? And you can see from the options provided, writing and structuring is right at the top, followed closely by literature search and review. And if you look at the 4th item, that's about 14% of you that are also ticked on editing and proofreading. So that's, a large majority that's concerned about content writing. And so much of writing is really at the heart of academia. So it really stands to reason that, just to set context, writing is a big pain point. You have environmental factors. You may or may have English as a first language, or it may be an additional language for some of you. Even if you're good at English, academic writing is new to many of us in the beginning. It's a learned skill. It's very complex in the way papers are structured and things. And all of this has certain impacts. For example, it may lead to low self-esteem. There was a paper just last year that was published in PLOS ONE that we love to cite. It's that folks who do not speak English as a first language take twice as much time to write and several other tasks. It also leads to low participation in conferences, even being speakers and things like that. And then you have some real negative outcomes. For example, poor grades. If you're a student, it impacts successful PhD outcomes. And then it also could lead to a higher chance of journal rejection. There are a lot of papers that have put these outcomes forward. And so with that context, let's talk a little bit about the best approach to write papers. And that's where I would like to ask Dr. Faheem what his views are on this. You share a lot of papers, a lot of tips, a lot of processes online. What would you say is your top tips for writing from your own experience?
Yeah, First of all, thank you, Charlotte, for the opportunity. Hello, everyone who have joined online. I was informed that there are more than 5,000 people who registered. So I believe that there is a huge number who are listening to us. So thank you all for joining. Um, the question as far as goes that how to structure and write your research paper effectively. So certainly it's an abstract question, and there's a lot that I can say. As far as the more concrete question is concerned that you asked, that what would be the top tips? My own experience is that as far as writing research papers are concerned, it comes with experience. If somebody wants to write, a world-class paper, someone who just completed his undergraduate, it would be, I would say, a more ambitious thing to say. Uh, I have seen students who consult, like there are some kind of, you can find papers, you can find books where which says how to write papers. My own understanding is that you learn the best by doing it rather than by reading it. If I read 100 books on how to write a paper, I don't think it would be as effective as it would be if I write a paper myself.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is that if you want to write good papers, or if you want to learn how to write papers, the best thing is to write. Of course, your first draft would be not as good, but over a period of time, your first paper won't be that good, but your 10th paper would be certainly much better. So that's the first thing I would say, that the more simple approach is that keep writing, write. And then, like for example, in my case, when I started my PhD, what I used to do was that when I used to write, I would even discuss and seek feedback on individual paragraphs. Like for example, if I have written abstract, I remember that in my time, I had a very good lab mate who was senior to me, and over lunch, I would just take a print and put it in front of him. That, can you please give me feedback how I have written this abstract? And he was kind enough, now a very good friend, and he would give me feedback. And in the same way, back then my own PhD supervisor would give me feedback, and he would point out, okay, next time when you write this part, write it this way. Or if there is, for example, in the start I used to make mistakes with respect to justifications. I would write something and I would not bake it with any citation, or I would not bake it with the justification. So then my supervisor would highlight it that, okay, here, this part you have written, but it doesn't have any baking. So I think feedback is the second point that I would suggest to all our audience or young researchers, that when you're writing, try to seek feedback from your own lab mates, because of course it varies from situation to situation. Because I was lucky enough to have to be doing PhD in a lab which was having senior members, and I could seek feedback from them. But generally also, if you try to find out, you can find people who can give you very honest feedback on your writing. So that's the second point that I would emphasize, that uh, young researchers should try to seek feedback. And the third one is that writing improves when you are learning from top papers. What I used to do was that when I would complete my experimentation and when I would reach the stage of writing, I would put 2 or 3 example papers in front of myself. So let's suppose I'm submitting to a particular journal. What I would do is that I would take some top class papers which are very relevant to my research from that journal. I would put it in front of myself, and I would see how they have drafted various sections, like for example, how they have written the introduction section. And then I would learn from them. What is their starting sentence? For example, many a times I see that students, they don't have a starting sentence for the paragraph. They would start something which doesn't reflect the whole nature of that paragraph. So that used to be my third way, that how I learned writing. So just to summarize about writing, I think the top 3 suggestions would be that the first thing is write more. The second thing is seek feedback. And the third thing would be to to put some exemplar papers in front of yourself when you're writing research papers.
Yeah, that's very good advice and very nice summarized. And thanks for calling that out for the younger audiences, the early career researchers who may still not be aware. So it's essentially a lot of learning how to write doesn't really come from a book. It's not something you can learn from a manual, but it comes from reading a lot of some of the best literature. That's very interesting. It also requires, I'm guessing, quite a bit of discipline and focus, considering the amount of writing that you need to do at a given point in time. So, how do you recommend, focused writing sessions, building those practices? Because it's a lot of time to be spent on that with everything else.
Yeah, so I totally understand and agree to the point what you mentioned, Charlotte, that writing generally, what I have seen students is they are lazy. They would not write until they are really pushed for it. They would read, and when it comes to writing, they would be reluctant or lazy. Um, in my case, I somehow, right from the very beginning, I don't know, I mean, it was by nature or whatever. I loved writing. Even if you can see it from the amount of writing I do online. I write almost on daily basis around, I would say, 1,000 words. So for me, it didn't happen, but I understand that many students, they struggle to write because there is what is called probably a writer's block or something, that there is this reluctance to start. My advice for that would be that uh, there is a one of the professors in my university. He used to say that everything seems difficult before you do it, just do it. So the difficult part is starting. um, it's not specific to writing, it's generally whatever we want to do in our life. It seems difficult from a distance, but once you start it, then you realize, it's not that difficult, and then there is a certain flow that comes in. So my suggestion to students would be that take writing as something interesting, and not as something to be scared of. And another thing is start writing. Start, the first sentence. I'm sure that you write this first sentence. The second sentence, writing the second sentence would not be that difficult. I'll give you an example. When I was writing my thesis, my PhD thesis, now PhD thesis, that's a 200-300 page document, right? And the difficult part of it is the starting sentence. So I remember I thought like for 2 days what to start with. And then later on the hindsight, when I was thinking, I was like, why even I was thinking for 2 days? What could have been the case? I would have written a wrong sentence. I could have revised it. But that does happen. When you have a journey of, let's suppose, writing 200 pages, the starting point seems a bit difficult. But generally, I certainly agree that if people follow a certain discipline in their approach, like for example, maybe allocating a couple of hours on daily basis to writing, that could be one approach. I didn't follow it myself, but I remember one of the postdoc in my lab, he used to follow a technique called Pomodoro. So he would have like, these 20-25 minutes blocks,
Yeah.
and that he would just focus on a particular thing. Like, for example, he would turn off all the notifications and so on and so forth. So yes, people should try that to allocate maybe a specific time. I've heard from many people that in the start of the day, like the early phase, people are more energetic and fresh to do something that is more handy.
Yeah.
So that could be something that students can follow, to just allocate maybe a couple of hours on daily basis to writing.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Those are great notes on habit building. Some of them are really tough to adopt. But personally, I relate to what you said because it applies to all forms of writing. And mostly it's just about just putting ideas on the wall as much as possible to get you started. And before you know it, you're so much better a writer than you used to be. So let's move on to the next part. So to make this a little engaging, beyond a one-on-one, I'm sure Dr. Faheem and I can have a long conversation, but let's try to understand from the audience. Um, so before we do that, uh, I actually have a new question. So when you've talked about your top 3 tips, and you've talked about habitual building a habit towards writing and building that discipline, do you also maybe want to talk about structure? Because you mentioned sentence starters at one point, and you said that it would be really great if you can read, find out this how to start off each section. So maybe you want to share a little bit about this graphic that you shared with us a little earlier about sections, how to break down your paper, maybe some sort of aid beyond starting. Do you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, sure, Charlotte. So this is a graphic I came across online. I forgot the name of the creator of this graphic, but I found it very interesting and very insightful. So here, if we see, like, I particularly wanted to talk about the because when we write papers, of course, we want to do good research, but at the end of the day, most of us, we want to publish it as well in top news, because it gives you some recognition, and as a PhD student, you even need it for to graduate. So I particularly wanted to talk about what it takes to have a paper accepted. Like, for example, I'm a reviewer for many journals, for many conferences, but when I am looking at a paper, what I look for in a paper, right? There are certain things like, for example, the significance of the work that you have done, or in other words, we can say, is it important or not? For example, if you want to see the impact of a particular variable on another variable, let's suppose you want to see the impact of weather on the job market in a particular country, as an example, uh, you first need to justify that, is it important or is it not important? Okay, who is going to benefit from it? Who is the user of my research? So these sorts of things, that the like the question that I put in, that is it important or not, that should be justified in the introduction section. If I read the introduction section of the paper and I am not convinced that this research is important, the my mind is slowly going towards not to accept the paper. Similarly, the next aspect is novelty. Is it new or not? For example, if a research has been carried out, let's suppose 5 years ago, and if you're doing the same thing again, it doesn't make sense. Or even if the novelty is very little, again the reviewer is not, it's hard to convince. So this point, that whether this is novel or this is not novel, again, I would, in the first three sections, I should be convinced that it is not. Primarily in the literature review section, I want to know that what others have done, and then where was the gap, and then how you have filled that gap.
Yeah.
So what I mean to say is that it is very important for any researcher, when they are reporting their findings, that they need to position the novelty of the research with respect to the existing research. So that part, definitely, by when I finish the literature review section, I need to be convinced that there is novelty in the research. The next section, which here being shown, is that methodology. Here I need to be convinced that you have done this research using a proper methodology. Okay, if, for example, your data set that you have used, it's not reliable. Let's suppose I'm doing research on software engineers, that when they are more productive in writing code, and the data that I have collected are from, let's suppose, environmentalists, it doesn't make sense, right? So what the point I'm trying to make is that you need to do the research in the right way. Only then your findings would be acceptable. In the research section, of course, you present your findings here. Although it might not, many other seasoned researchers would not agree with me, but I would still say that in the research section, if it's a completely plain text without any visuals, like, for example, figures, graphs, or tables, it becomes very boring. Of course, this is science. I should not get bored. I should go into the depth, even if it's presented in text. But I'm speaking from the realistic point of view, that it's much better for researchers to try to visualize, because as we all of us would have heard, that a picture is worth 100 words. So my suggestion would be that it's much better to try to visualize what you can visualize. Discussion section, it's my favorite section in a paper. I love to see what the author themselves think of the findings. Okay, how do they view it? When they reflect on it, what is their thinking? Is it good? Is it bad? What are the limitations, and so on and so forth? So for me, that's a very important section. And of course, when you conclude, you try to put something in a summarized form, and then you try to give something for the researchers that, okay, what more could be built on the top of that. So this is generally what I personally look for in a paper, when I am reviewing a paper, or even when I'm writing a research paper.
Yeah. So the takeaway is that everyone knows the typical structure in writing papers. You can maybe read, get your sentence starters, but ultimately the practice that you can do is communicate the value of the paper to really get through the peer reviewer. That's really nice insight. Thank you. Now we are good to move to the poll. I'd like to understand from our users, at what stage do you use AI tools in your publication journey? Because, a lot of the processes that we do now in research writing, several portions can be automated. So take a few seconds, read through this poll, and answer honestly. Let us know what you think. So just give it a minute. Do you want to guess, Faheem, at what stage do you use AI tools? I'm guessing from the first poll, the first poll that we did on the registration is probably going to be research and literature.
Yeah, I believe in literature. Doing literature, you are finding the right literature. Many students, they do use AI tools.
Yeah.
But let's see what do we find out from the audience.
Okay, cool. Let's see the results. If we have some, there's a poll function on the side that you can also look at to see the results. Just wait for my team to present them. Can we see the results, please? Aha, there we go. Okay, that's a huge. Okay, so they have not been ordered by the percentage of votes, but you can see we were right. It was to review and analyze literature. So it got less of a vote than discovery. That's really interesting to me. We have a lot of technologies now helping researchers understand and analyze papers further. With that, I think we can move to the next section. We've discussed writing. Let's now talk about submission. And you've now published.
Charlotte, I just wanted to add one point to the previous states that we have got. Yeah. So what my experience was back in when I was doing PhD, I certainly started with a literature review, and I did 2 systematic literature reviews in the first year of my PhD, which is not normal. People usually do 1, or maybe they don't even do 1. So in my experience, it takes a lot of time to identify the literature, because in systematic literature reviews, you cannot miss a paper. You miss a paper, you will be redirected. Okay, you need to add this paper. So I remember it took me a lot of time to identify all the literature related to the topic. Now you have tools to do that for you. Maybe some researchers would not agree with me, and they would say, no, the students should do it themselves, identify the literature. I am not of that view. I believe that if it could be somehow the effort could be reduced to the use of tools, like, for example, there are tools like I believe R Discovery is an app that can help you to identify literature. Similarly, there are tools like Lit Maps or Research Rabbit which can help you in identifying literature. So I believe that students should at least have a look at those and see if they can reduce the amount of effort in terms of identifying the right literature.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have one of the sections coming up just after where you'll talk about AI tools. So I hope you can elaborate a little bit more on this point. We can move to the next section. Let's talk about submission. So, you published several papers. For the PhD early career researchers who are about to get published for the first time, who struggle with it, those who need to make specific publication goals every year, what advice do you have on boosting productivity, on tools that you can use, the various checkpoints that you can do? And we spoke, and you mentioned a checklist in particular that could help, because there's so many balls in the air at the same time. So what do you suggest?
And so, Charlotte, I think this is important, in this I hope that the audience can benefit from it, that as a reviewer, when I am starting reviewing a paper, of course it goes from abstract and down, introduction and so on. Now, if I find one typo or grammar issue, I just ignore it. If I find the second one, I'll just ignore it. But if I find the third one, it turns me off. Okay. And I believe that it's the same with other reviewers as well. Similarly, there are, like, if there are formatting issues that you are, for instance, your paragraph is ending there is space, and then the other one is starting after a while. So what I'm trying to say is that these kind of formatting issues, grammar, typo errors, it doesn't impact the significance of your research, but it does affect the presentation of your research, and it turns the reviewer off. Because what I would think is that this student is lazy, right?
Yeah.
The way I look at the publication process is that you need to, the put it this way, that the reviewer has rejection in mind, and you need to bring him from rejection towards acceptance of your paper. Now, if on the way you have these many errors that, okay, every now and then you are missing the article,
Yeah.
you are not using the right grammar, so it turns the reviewer off. Now, the point is that these things could be very easily fixed, right?
Yeah.
These kind of the grammar, typo, formatting issues, they are not hard to fix. For instance, in my time, what I used to do was that I would give my paper to my lab mates, and of course my supervisor is going to go through that, so they would identify and they would remove. Now, having said that, many of the papers, they still have these issues. So definitely there are now, I mean, back then when I was doing PhD, I didn't use any tools, but now there are tools that can also help you to remove these kind of errors automatically.
Exactly.
And I don't think that it impacts the learning curve of the student. I mean, a typo error is most often because of some kind of laziness or not paying attention to the details. But what I would say is that we can go through a checklist that I believe we have on the next slide, and then hopefully that
Yes.
would be of some. Yeah. So here, to all the students joining, I would suggest that try to put this checklist on your table, print it, put it in front of yourself. When you have written your draft, your manuscript, try to pass your manuscript through these checks. First, you need to make sure that your manuscript is free from plagiarism, because I believe many of the journals and conferences, they have very strict rules, and it's anyway good to pass your manuscript just to see that if there is any intentional or unintentional plagiarism, because it could be very handy for you and for your supervisor if you submit a manuscript and it has plagiarism. Similarly, you need to check the typo errors. You need to see that whether the your manuscript it is as per the guidelines of the journal. Like, for example, if the journal allows 12 pages and you have written a manuscript that is a 14 pages, you submit it and it's going to get rejected. The same goes for the conferences. There is the word limit or there is page limit, so you need to adhere to those rules. My suggestion to all of you is that try to print this list and extend it further. It has 18 points. You can add further points that could help you put it on your table. And whenever you are drafting a paper or you complete your manuscript, try to go through these checks and make sure that it doesn't have these kind of issues. Your manuscript doesn't have these kind of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great checklist, and it's always handy to keep around when you're writing papers. So thanks for sharing this with us. But you're absolutely right that for certain elements, there are tools out there, and so there's really no excuse why you would have a typo left in a paper. We're
Yeah,
also
just sorry, just to add, Charlotte, that these are very easy to identify errors for the reviewer. Like, for example, okay, there are article issues, there are formatting issues. Why do you even give them this opportunity?
yeah,
I have seen many times that I have got this comment from the reviewer that, oh, this particular reference in your reference list, it's missing the date. Now,
yeah,
what happens is that when you are automatically adding these references at the end of your paper, when you are exporting it from Google Scholar or somewhere, so sometimes they miss the date.
yeah,
Now, many students, they don't go through them, that okay, to make sure that every reference has the proper author's name and that it has the publication value and the date, and that just gets flagged when the reviewer goes through it. So it's just best to just make sure that these things are not missing in your manuscript.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can now move to the next poll that we've got. Um, a lot of us are now using AI tools to get writing support. Before we move on to the next section, which specifically talks about how to use AI to write, I wanted to understand from the audience, um, essentially, what is the biggest challenge you face with using AI tools? Because there are plenty of them out there right now, and lots to choose from. So take a minute and let us know. And while we wait for him, you were talking about the tools that are there for language, the tools that are there around. Oh no, go ahead and please run the poll if that's still happening and share the result whenever it's ready. Yeah. So what I want to understand from you, maybe after we see the poll, you've shared your top best recommendations for tools for different processes, because it's not just writing and reading, it's so many other pieces. So I'm looking forward to knowing your views on the tools themselves. I've always wondered about this. I know on the one hand that there are so many to choose from. That's a problem, a legit problem. But then these are also tools that are, passing and using proprietary data and IP from research that's not also published. So we put down some of these options. Um, yeah. What would you say is your biggest problem using AI tools?
Um, Again, I think it comes down to the laziness of many individuals. What happens is that when we get used to a particular tool, it's very difficult to change or to shift to another one. For example, if I use a particular, I'll give you an example. I used to use draw.io in my PhD times to draw figures, and I stick with it for so long, despite the fact that there were many interesting and more sophisticated tools that came out. And it was more recently that I shifted to another tool. So I think one issue is that we generally are reluctant towards changing or accepting a change. So, like for example, I've seen students who, despite knowing that it's much better to use, let's say, LaTeX for writing papers, they are still stick to using MS
Oh,
Word for writing papers. So, I think that changing or going from the to the uncomfortable zone, that is somewhat challenging at times.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think I've changed my toothpaste brand in decades. I think it's a very similar choice when you're very used to something. So we have the
Yeah.
results up here, and I can see almost an even split between knowing how to choose between different tools, which sort of ties in with what you spoke about, and concerns about plagiarism. I'm guessing that's for generative AI text, which is a definite concern. And then you have subscription fees as well. Yeah. Yeah. So this sort of ties in with what we've spoken about. That's interesting. Let's actually move on to the next section. And on the subject of AI tools to improve writing productivity. Share your top recommendations with the audience.
Okay, so the question is that how and when to use AI to speed up the writing and submission process. So, well, here, before I jump into and answer the question, I do want to put some kind of a disclaimer or whatever you call it. So, with AI, the first thing to all the young researchers, students, anyone who has joined, the first thing you need to keep in mind is that you need to make sure that you are following the guidelines, the ethical standards set by your institutions, in as well as the journals or the conferences where you are submitting. Because academic integrity, that's of much higher importance than your single publication or anything that you're doing. So that is the first thing you need to keep in mind, not to deviate from them, because um, at the end of the day, it's not only you who's going to get impacted, it's also the entire research team working on the on that paper who would get impacted. If, for example, if you're using AI, many journals, they require you to declare it. I personally, in one of the project that we were doing, we were using AI to create synthetic data.
Yeah.
But what we do is that we declare it upfront that this is not real data, this is synthetic data, this is based created based on a smaller sample of data. So that's the first thing. You need to make sure that the guidelines that are set by your institutions and by the journals that you're submitting, those needs to be followed. Now, when it comes to how and when to use AI to speed up the writing and submission process, there are many different areas where you can use AI. um, the first thing is, when you're doing research, you have to do literature search, right? You need to identify the right set of papers, you need to understand what they have done, and you need to then position your work with respect to that already existing work. So I know that there are tools which can help you to identify research papers. Like, for example, earlier I mentioned that there is this mobile app, or discovery, which can help you to identify papers, because I used it for to get alerts about new papers. So usually when I go to office in the morning, I try to see that okay, what new research has been published in my research area. Similarly, there are tools like I mentioned, lit maps or research rapid and so on, which can help you to correlate the literature to see that how these papers relate to each other. And then there are tools which can help you to summarize research papers, because if there is a 20-page paper, majority of the times you don't need to go through the entire paper. If there is a tool that can help you to get your answers from the paper, for example, okay, what data sets have been used by this 5 or 6 papers. So there are tools like Scholar CY which can help you to get those answers. So the first area where you can use AI tools is literature search. The next thing, which is my favorite, or where one should use AI tools, is about polishing your research papers. So you have done your research, you have written your manuscript, and now you want to polish it. So what I mean by polishing is that you want to remove the grammar and the typo errors. You want to check the formatting. You want to make sure that there is consistency in your text, and so on and so forth. So for that purpose, certainly you can use AI tools. Now, what Charlotte has shown on the screen, that is a broader scope of AI tools, that where you can use as a researcher, where you can use tools like, for example, for managing your references in the paper, you can use several tools. Similarly, for data analysis and visualization, there are tools like Power BI, Excel, and so on and so forth that you can use. Note taking, which is again a very important part of your PhD or your research journey. So there are tools that can help you to take notes. I believe I was sharing this with someone, that one of my friend recently, I was having a coffee with him, and he said that we were talking about his job, and I asked him what exactly you do, and he says, I take notes during the meetings. And I said, like, really? So can't you just, I mean, use some tool to take notes for you? Because you can have the recording of the meeting, and then that recording can be converted into much better meeting minutes. So the pace with which technology and tools are advancing, we human beings are not. And that is something, the gap needs to be filled. So anyone who is keeping up with the pace, I'm sure you, on your social media feed, you come across all these amazing tools that are coming out on daily basis. And similarly, for paper writing, I already discussed that there are tools like Paperpal, and even there is a tool, I think, I forgot the name. I think it's in the drawing section, Mind the Graph. That is a good tool that you can draw figures for your paper. And for literature review, you can use like lit maps,
Yeah.
art discovery, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really nice when you shared this roundup. I thought it was very nice and comprehensive. in general, some of them have a slightly different approach, but it's nice to see the option, the variety out there. I like that you spoke about how to use AI responsibly, and you went through that checklist of declaring use of checking university guidelines. Those are absolutely important. I understand that someone has asked that question in the Q&A as well, that maybe we can pick up towards the end. But in general, I completely agree. So much now can be automated. We're living in a very different time, and I'm also extremely excited about how you can use AI to just be more productive. I understand that in universities, while AI tools are great at leveling the playing ground.
Of course,
Um,
it's just, Charlotte, I just want to give you an example. The other day, I think last week, I came across something on social media, and then it was so fascinating that I immediately tried it. There was a tool that was for data analysis,
yeah,
and I uploaded an Excel sheet and I asked for particular questions that, okay, analyze this data for this, and you would be surprised the kind of graphs, the kind of insight it took out of that data. It was amazing. Of
yeah,
course, I mean, I'm not advocating that everybody should do that. Of course, it's much better to learn how to analyze data on your own, and then yeah, you can take help from these tools. But the point I'm trying to make is that the tools that are coming out there, they're amazing. And I mean, it's the same. I think that this example is very um, common example that there is a huge debate, and we can discuss for hours and hours about the use of AI in research.
yeah,
um, there was somebody I was discussing with, and he gave me this example that it's like, when calculator came out, the point was that it is not good for mathematicians and it's not good for kids and so on. However, with time, I mean, calculator win. It eventually is used by everyone. So
yeah,
my I might be wrong, but my understanding is that in the coming years you will see more and more adoption of AI
yeah.
tools. I hope that it's within the ethical standards and people follow the standards and rules and regulations when using these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a leap since calculators, but I sort of share that opinion in general. And I think it's very optimistic. The approaches, the attitudes are evolving, and I think several journals now also see the merit of AI tools. And yes, the quality may not be 100% today, but it will keep evolving. The more people use it, the more people share feedback. Um, yeah, so at this point, what I want to say is that we in at Paperpal, when we developed the product as well, my own personal experience, my background was in academic editing. And the first time I saw the first version of our model that powers the language check, I was maybe skeptical. I was like, I don't think a machine can edit as well as a human can. It's too technical. But then I saw those first corrections made by the technology that you now see on Paperpal, and I was blown away. And we've piloted that technology extensively with editors, with authors, and we've seen like a 60, 70%, sometimes even a 95% acceptance rate of those model suggestions. So it's definitely, moving in, I would say, a positive direction. And
Yeah.
yeah, and on the subject of PayPal, since we're here, we build with a very specific philosophy in mind. And you've seen in the previous slide all of these different tools that accomplish different tasks in research writing. It goes beyond just writing. It goes into reading and data analysis and note taking and so many other little things. But what we're trying to do is, at least for the writing pieces, we want to be able to make the tool as all encompassing as possible. And so what we've done is, we've tried to create built-in features that help with different stages of the process. Whether you're writing, whether you just need ideas. So for example, when you're writing, we've now got something that's just very recently released. It's something that's called research, where you can ask a question. One of our collaborators, we speak a lot to authors like you, and I use a research function to get ideas for what to build next. And one of the things that they told us was that we want to be able to, yeah, we want to write, we want to correct English. But sometimes I have this idea in my mind, and I don't want to look up 5 PDFs and search online for a way to back a new argument while writing. So we've released research that gives you answers backed with real citations. These are not hallucinations. You can save these sources, and this particular feature space on Paperpal is going to blow up now. I'm very excited. You should definitely watch that space. We're adding styling options, and you can ask questions within your library and all sorts of things. In future, we also have some writing features to help you get some inspiration while you're writing. If you're stuck, if you want to say something but you don't know how to frame it, so we sort of allow you to create some instructions for the AI, and then you'll get a polished academic prediction, so to speak. There's, of course, the polishing side with the language checks that I spoke of. You just put in your text, and you get very accurate, academic focused language suggestions. A few other features, like AI translation, which is very handy, especially if English is not your first language. You're thinking in your own language, and you're suddenly stuck. Just use the AI translation. If your draft is more or less ready, you just want to kind of polish, you want to improve the way it's written, we have a whole bunch of rewrite features that are very popular with our audience. You just sort of select a piece of text and get a response. And finally, on the submission side, we offer a number of checks right now, and are going to keep increasing. One of them is the similarity check that's powered by Turnitin. So if you remember the checklist that Dr. Faheem shared a little earlier, check for similarity, because if you're using AI, generative AI to write, there's a very high chance that maybe one of those sentences has been sourced from someplace. So you want to make sure you attribute. So this is a really handy tool. It's right there. And we also have journal submission checks, which is simply, a feature where you upload a document and you get technical checks for free in a report, where some of these items, it's a little small, but you can see some of these items relate to counts and figures and tables and structure. So it's a lot like the checklist that you saw a little earlier. To get a sanity check on your paper before you submit. It's advocated by journals as well. And if you're a Prime user, you can download the manuscript that you uploaded, and you can see edits made in line plus comments. It's almost like sending your paper to a peer and then getting suggestions. Dr. Faheem also recommended something called a review or a critique, and we've been working on something. So something new is coming soon to Paperpal. So keep watching out. We're always adding new features. Now, I know that many of you are existing Paperpal users. I wanted to understand a final poll to close out this session before we move on to Q&A. If you have used Paperpal, which feature do you find most useful? So yeah, can we have that poll running? Yeah, it's live. Great. And while we wait for that, Faheem, you've seen Paperpal evolve rapidly in the last year. We've been talking often. Have you tried out some of the new features? What do you think?
I shall have certainly tried all, I believe, all of the features of Paperpal. If you ask me which ones are my favorite or which ones I use, I would say that the one thing that I struggle a lot with in my writing is the use of articles, because English is not my first language, and that's why I struggle a lot with the right use of articles. So the first and most important thing I use it for is to fix the use of articles. The next thing I believe that the checks that it has, like the language checks, the consistency checks, and then the journal submission checks, plagiarism checks, I believe those are very useful. So to say it in a nutshell, I believe that if for polishing papers, it's amazing. Yeah. It's really good. And lastly, the one other feature that I like, maybe others would say that might not agree, but I think the one feature we have in Paperpal is trim feature. What it does is that if you have written something and that is You need to shrink it, then the size of or the number of words, because many times it happens to me that I write a paper and I go beyond the word limit or the page limit, and then I have to shrink it. So trim is a is I think a very useful feature for that kind of thing, to reduce the number of words without impacting the meaning of it.
I think many people agree with you, Dr. Fahim. I can see that the rewrites, the poll has disappeared. Can we see it again? Thank you. It seems like it's the most popular choice from folks who use it. And I agree. I was just looking at our product feedback from last month, and people are absolutely wild for not only trim but also make academic, which surprised me personally. So it tells me a lot about what researchers look for while they're writing. Yeah, so this is pretty validating, and it echoes what you said as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We can now maybe move on to the next part. But before that, for those of you who have not tried Paperpal, we hope that this makes it sweeter with an exclusive offer for 40% off on Paperpal Prime Annual. Just use the code that you see in yellow, and before the month is out. And of course, we'll be sharing resources in the resources section right here. It's maybe the third or fourth icon. It's already uploaded. Download them. Go ahead, and we hope you find them useful. We can now move on to the Q&A session. We have about 9 minutes. Uh, so let's see. My colleagues have curated a few questions. Okay, so what are some best practices for using AI responsibly? I think we've already covered these in a bit. So maybe let me go to the next question, which is very, very interesting. And I think you can get this for sure. What would be your advice on writing a thesis while working full time? It's been upvoted 8 times. You should definitely take that. Let me just elaborate with a few related questions before you go ahead. One participant said that they will just complete a year of their PhD. There's rigorous coursework and structure. They're struggling to read and write. And although, they write a lot of non-academic content, how do you focus on academic writing? And then the last bit is, how do you deal with procrastination? So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think let's start from the last part. That's a very interesting part, procrastination. It happens with every PhD student. I'll share with you my own way of doing things, and it's not just specific to PhD students. I think irrespective of whichever field you are, procrastination or delaying things, it happens. I personally believe in execution. I'm not a man of planning. Whenever I have personally planned something, it didn't go. I believe in doing things. And as far as the procrastination thing is concerned, what I used to do was, and there are different techniques people follow. Like, for example, some people follow the 5 second rule that, count from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and just move, do it. Similarly, there are like, techniques. If something takes less than 2 minutes, just do it right away. Don't delay it. Procrastination, it's like I believe that I have a whole article written on procrastination. I don't remember the exact points of that article now, but there were points like, the execution is everything. Overthinking, delaying things, it makes you worried. It pushes you backward. My suggestion is that don't think too much, just do it. I simply, I know many of people would disagree with me that by saying that, I don't plan, I just do things. And majority of the times, when you start doing, you better understand, and there is always a way to go back. But procrastination in PhD, it's very common. Try to be more of man of doing rather than a man of or a person of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good advice. Just right, I suppose. Okay, now we have a very, very high upvoted question that I can take. So with Paperpal AI, will editing be flagged as writing by, as I'm guessing that's an AI generated AI detection related question. Yes, there's a high likelihood that that might happen, but keep in mind that AI detectors are anyway not very accurate right now. They're still developing, but it might still happen. That's simply because Paperpal is generating, text from a computer, and that's fine. You should use it as a baseline. We've always maintained that when you're using AI generated text, use it as inspiration, but make it your own, rewrite, etc., etc. Definitely run it through plagiarism checker, because that is also a concern. Definitely do not use AI generated text by itself, whether you're using Paperpal or any other tool for that matter. We do not explicitly try to do, I don't even know if it's possible, but explicitly try to avoid being detected by AI detectors, because that in itself is highly unethical and you shouldn't seek to do that. So yeah,
Charlotte,
that's my answer. Yeah, Fahim.
Charlotte, I just want to add one point here for the benefit of all the students, that when you're using tools like Paperpal or any other tool, as Charlotte mentioned, make sure that you do the cross checking. If you are relying 100% on the tool, it's not going to work for multiple reasons. The tool, it doesn't have that human touch, so it can go wrong. That's quite possible. The other point is that the content that is generated by an AI tool, it's very generic. As far as my experience goes, it's generic. It's you as a human who needs to come in and who needs to make it specific. So the question that whether these would be flagged by the plagiarism checker or the AI detector, I think it should, as Charlotte mentioned, because these tools are there to help you. These are not there to replace you. At the end of the day, it's you who is a researcher and who need to put his own mind into the writing.
Yeah, 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 absolutely agree. Um, okay, let's move to the next few questions. Um, how to reduce plagiarism due to commonly used terms? That's actually a very valid question. A lot of science writing is so similar that it's probably going to be flagged, by a similarity checker. But that said, I think, don't sweat the details, because I think some obvious phrases and all of that are okay. And I think most journals, and Dr. Fahim, please back me up. I believe that most journals have a certain cutoff, something like, similarity shouldn't be greater than 5% for a single source, and shouldn't be greater than 20% overall. So you shouldn't be trying to reach for 0% similarity simply because so much of the academic literature sounds similar. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely, Charlotte. My understanding is that the first thing is that as far as terms are concerned, they are not to be caught up by the editor or by the program chair of conference or a journal. If for example, if you are from the medical domain and there is the name of a disease which is 4 or 5 words long, you, you have to use it. It's not plagiarism. There is no other way. You have to use it. Yes, if you have taken something verbatim from a source, like a whole sentence, then that is plagiarism. I can give you one example, that one of the paper of research that I know, it got disc rejected from a very good journal, a very solid work. Later on, it was published, and the reason was that there was one sentence where there were like 5 or 6 words, I believe, that they were taken from a source, and I believe it was very much unintentional, but it was flagged. So my suggestion is that as far as the use of terms is concerned, you don't need to be worried about that. As far as taking a sentence or part of a sentence from another source is concerned, that is where you need to be worried, and definitely you can remove these kind of plagiarism when these are flagged by the plagiarism detector.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a related question. Do all plagiarism scanning software programs like Turnitin detect AI text from tools like Quillbot, PayPal, Grammarly? If yes, what's the benefit of using these tools if it will be? Okay, that's the question. What's the benefit of using these tools if it will be detected as plagiarism? Yeah.
I I think, as we discussed it already, that these tools are not there to do 100% of the job. Like, for example, if we take the example of the checks, which I personally like in Paperpal, Before you submit your paper, what Paperpal does, it tells you that, okay, where are the issues in your writing? So it fixes your grammar, it fixes your typo errors, it looks for the consistency and make sure. Now, these things are not, you're not using it for writing the paper, you're just checking your paper whether it is adhering to the standards of the journal or not. Similarly, if you are, for example, using this tool, Mind the Graph, for drawing figures, it cannot be flagged. And yes, if you want to write a paper using Paperpal, like, write all the text for you, then it would be flagged, and then it should be flagged, because then as a researcher, you're not learning, you are just relying 100% on a tool. So in a nutshell, these tools are there to help you. These are not there to write the paper 100% for you.
Yeah, to replace you, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely. So we have so many questions and we're out of time, but it's just impossible to cover all of them. There's one though, if we have a minute, very quickly, if you can cover. Basically, you mentioned that the discussion section is your absolute favorite to write earlier in the session. How would you recommend, someone has asked, what are your tips for writing a discussion section using AI in particular?
Okay, I'll skip the last part about using AI, but I'll tell you how to write the discussion section. I think I have written a whole article on that. You can find it online, how to write the discussion section. Primarily, there are 6 questions that needs to be answered in the discussion section. The first thing is that what is similar in your findings as compared to the previous findings of other papers. The next question is what is different in your findings as compared to the findings of the previous papers. Then the next question is what are the implications of your findings for researchers, which means that what further research can be built on the top of your findings. The fourth question would be that what are the implications of your findings for industry, which means that, like, for example, if I'm working in the computer science field or in AI field, so okay, if I have some findings, how the industry can benefit from my findings. And the next question that you need to answer in your discussion is that what are the threats to the validity of your findings. Okay, so there might be some limitations revolving the research that you have done, so you need to mention them so that when we interpret those results, we have that in mind, that okay, this research was carried out in this particular context. And then there was one other question, but I don't remember that exactly. But this is what I want to see in the result section, in the discussion section of a paper.
Thank you so much for answering that so concisely. We're getting in a lot of questions that we've not been able to answer, and this was giving us a lot of fodder, guys, for future webinars. We are out of time officially. We'd love to hear your views. Please tell us what you liked about the session. We hope you learned something new. The feedback form is dropped in there. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you, Dr. Faheem. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone who joined. And I hope the same that it would have been useful for you, this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.